Today on Food for Thought, I'm with Stephen Travers. Stephen graduated from the Institute of Clinical Hypnotherapy and Psychotherapy in 2005 in clinical hypnotherapy. During the last decade, Stephen has successfully treated thousands of people for smoking, weight loss, anxiety, panic attacks, trauma, phobias, confidence, and a variety of other psychological and emotional issues, as you'd expect with his training. But he's also the main trainer for the havening technique in Ireland, a technique I'm very interested in learning more about today. And I was reading a few years ago about Dr Rudens' work, When the Past is Always Present, and I'm hoping to learn quite a lot more from Stephen today. Welcome, Stephen. How are you?
I'm very well, Debbie. Thank you. How are you?
I'm fine. Now, Dr Rudens presents in his book a neurobiological theory for an exposure therapy that involves re-experiencing a trauma coupled with sensory stimulation. Tell me more about that theory.
Yeah, well, I suppose, to go back and look at how it all developed. Yeah. The story goes like this. Paul McKenna, the famous hypnotherapist, is a friend with Dr. Rudens, and going back about 12, 15 years ago, he was talking to Dr. Rudens about tapping, things like thought field therapy, which I'm sure you've heard about, which is tapping meridian points on the body. And Dr. Rudens went off and he started getting some good results with the tapping, which made him very curious about why it was working. Because there's a lot of talk, of meridian points and chi energy as part of the reason it makes the tapping work. But Dr. Rudens, being a neuroscientific researcher, a Western scientific thinker, had different ideas about why it was working. So he went on literally a 7-10 year study to find out why something like tapping was working. And he actually discovered and worked out exactly how trauma gets encoded in the brain and the body. And then he worked out how to completely and permanently clear it within minutes. And that's where the havening techniques come in. So there's a lot of neuroscience behind it and neurobiology from Dr. Rudens' work. And essentially he discovered, to put it in a nutshell, is that there's something called AMPA receptors that get stuck on a part of the brain called the amygdala, which controls our stress response. And these little AMPA receptors encode the emotional and physical symptoms of a traumatic event or experience. So when we work with someone with havening, we activate the trauma. We apply the havening, which is a psychosensory therapy. So we use sensory touch and pleasant psychological distraction. And the touch creates delta waves in the brain. And essentially the delta waves remove the AMPA receptors off the neurons in the amygdala and that completely switches off the emotional and physical stress response from the trauma. And that happens within minutes. And once the trauma is cleared, it's completely and permanently gone.
And it happens that quickly?
It happens that quickly, yes. And, I can appreciate some people may be skeptical about that. But part of the reason why it happens so quickly is because essentially the brain is an electrical chemical organ. So when we produce when we do the havening touch, which is stroking the arms, the hands, and the face, it's producing an electrical brainwave called a delta wave. Now, these delta waves are the same type of brainwaves that happen when you sleep or when you feel deeply relaxed or if you're in a deep meditation. And these delta waves, like an electrical current, literally go into the neurons, the AMPA receptors, within minutes. As they enter, they create a chemical called calcineurin inside the neurons with the AMPA receptors, and the calcineurin dephosphorylates or delinks the AMPA receptors off the neurons. And it's an electrical chemical change that's happening. So you think about like a light, electricity. The second you hit a light switch, boom, you've got light. And I'm sure when electricity was discovered, it was amazing. Suddenly you could hit a switch and boom, the whole room was illuminated. And that's part of the reason why havening works and why it's so fast and effective is because it's changing things at an electrical, chemical level in the brain.
And how are they identifying the neurological shifts? What research has been done at the same time as the havening technique's been happening?
Yeah. Well, Dr. Rudens himself is a Harvard graduate academic. He's a medical doctor. Ron spent, as I said, just over a decade researching havening. He did a lot of research with a guy called Mel Harper, who is a neuroscientific researcher as well. So Rudens did a lot of work with Mel Harper and then put the theory together. There's also been a study done by King's College in London by an academic psychiatrist called Professor Neil Greenberg. Dr. Rudens, Paul McKenna, and a couple of other clinicians were involved. They were treating post-traumatic stress disorder, and the results from that were quite phenomenal from that research. That research is actually available online as well. You can now see that full report of that actual research. So, and apart from that, results are everything in my book, in the sense Dr. Rudens treated thousands of his own patients in his private medical practice in New York, and so did his brother. His brother is also a dentist, Dr. Stephen Rudens, in New York, and between the both of them, they treated thousands of clients over about a decade period. So they built up this catalogue of case studies and research on how effective the treatment is. So there's just a snapshot of some of the research that's been going on, and there's still ongoing research at the moment. There's different studies and things happening in the US and the UK. So
there is quite a body of research behind it. Now, how different is this, or how much of a move on, I should ask, because that'd be of more interest to me, from Roger Callahan's TFT and then Craig's work with EFT. How much of a move on is it from those two pieces of work?
A highly significant one, as in, I've trained in TFT and EFT. That was part of my own training over the last decade or so. And I used to use TFT quite a bit, with, I have to say, very good results. So what I found with havening was, number one, the neuroscience behind it and the theory of how trauma gets encoded allowed me to actually pinpoint the encoding traumatic memories. So get to the root cause of what's causing the distressful symptoms, because that's very important to get a really complete permanent result with clearing trauma. So understanding the neuroscience and the neurobiology of how trauma is encoded really helped me to get even better results with my clients. And then the actual treatment itself, the havening, it just gets better, quicker results. It's more a complete result, as in, for example, when I clear a traumatic memory with havening, I can literally get the client to go back to the traumatic event, no matter how severe the trauma is, and say to them, go back now and do your best to get the trauma back. Try your best to bring back the negative state. And no matter how hard to try, they won't be able to. The emotional and physiological distress symptoms are completely gone. And if you find the root cause traumatic memory of what's causing the trauma, it won't come back. It's gone for good. So it's just, Dr. Rudens just has taken it to another level. It's really when I look at TFT, EFT, and we do have to, thank Roger Callahan, of course. He's the one who really discovered it, going back now, 20, 30 years ago, about meridians and the tapping. His work was groundbreaking for the time, and in many ways still is. But I suppose Dr. Rudens' work is really the natural evolution of these psychosensory therapies. So it's really, for me, the next stage, the next part of the evolution. And who knows, in another 10, 20 years, or maybe sooner, we might get another breakthrough and how to do it even quicker and faster, or another way of doing things. But at the moment, for me, havening is the most effective treatment I've come across to date for clearing trauma.
Now, is this established? Well, is Dr. Rudens establishing stronger links with Eastern healing maps or not?
See, Dr. Rudens would approach it from a more Western academic approach, because he is a medical doctor. That's his training, that's his background. Obviously, he speaks to other doctors. He does talks in America, the trainings in the US. So I suppose from his perspective, he likes to be able to get up in front of a group of clinicians, be it doctors or academics, and be able to explain it from that neuroscientific perspective, as opposed to, I suppose, the more Eastern one. And I think that was, I suppose, in some ways part of the problem with things like TFT and EFT was like we knew it worked very well for a lot of issues, but we couldn't exactly explain from a Western neuroscientific perspective why it worked. And I suppose that created some problems in its acceptance in mainstream psychology. But with Havening, which I think is one of its best assets, is that we actually have a lot of the neuroscience behind it. We can actually explain why it works very specifically and clearly, and then demonstrate it very consistently through the treatments.
Is that meaning more doctors are actually training in it, or is it still alternative therapists?
A lot of doctors have already done the training in both the US and the UK, and also in Ireland, because of the neuroscientific background of the treatment. So it is gaining more acceptance from the medical establishment, because of the science behind it, and because of the fact that it was actually developed and created by a medical doctor. Who, as I said, Ron is he's a neuroscientific researcher. He's a PhD, so that gives its own credibility, I suppose, to the treatment and where he's coming from in his own research.
There's been a massive amount of brain research happened in the last few decades, hasn't there? Particularly around neuroplasticity and the ability of it to change its structure and function through thought and experience, and to change gene expression and things like that. From your experience, where is this going next, do you think? How is this part of all of that exploration?
Yeah, well, what we've discovered is that Havening is, for example, when someone's traumatized, they tend to have a vulnerable neurochemical landscape, which means they tend to be more prone to suffer, from stress, trauma, phobias, and future life stressors. They tend to be more vulnerable to being affected by them. What we've discovered with Havening is that it actually produces a more resilient neurochemical landscape, because it increases things like dopamine, serotonin in the brain. It delinks these AMPA receptors off. It's actually changing the neural pathways. And essentially what we're doing, we're changing the brain from a vulnerable neurochemical landscape that's been affected by trauma, and we're producing a more resilient neurochemical landscape within the client. So I suppose that's one of the big positives from it as well. So there's things like we can use called affirmational Havening, where we install positive states within our clients, and we teach them how to do it as well, and that keeps the brain strong, if you like. It keeps stress levels low, it keeps serotonin levels high, stable, and overall it produces that more resilient neurochemical landscape. We've also discovered that when we Haven someone, because of all these delta waves that are being produced, we can implant more positive thoughts and behaviors within the client. Like, obviously, I use a lot of hypnosis, and I found that when I incorporate Havening in with NLP techniques and hypnosis, the NLP and the hypnosis techniques I'm using work much better for the client. It sticks much, much better. And we can explain that in the sense that Havening produces this delta sleep wave in the brain, and I suppose you're in a more suggestible state when these delta waves are flowing through the brain, and the brain just accepts more easily what we're putting in there through the power of suggestion, visualization, new behaviors, etc. So I'm quite excited about that. We call that growth havening, which is really, more about self-development and how to use havening to, design your life, change your behaviors, etc., and produce more positive states within yourself.
So it's a natural progression on, really, from dealing with the trauma stage to actually future stage.
Yeah, essentially, there's something called event havening and transpirational havening, which we use to clear traumatic memories and negative pathological emotions, things like anger, grief, guilt, fear, worry. Once we've cleared that, we then use the growth havening techniques, which are things like affirmational havening, outcome havening, where we use that from a more personal development perspective to make sure the client is more resilient moving forward, and just to get them really clear about where they're going in their life, so they have the resources and the resiliency to move forward in a more positive way. And that's where those techniques come in, and we can blend in NLP processes and even some hypnosis. Like Paul McKenna is a big fan of havening, and that's part of the reason why he's such a big fan of it, because he can see the potential, and he uses havening in that context as well, with NLP and hypnosis to great effect, and so do I, because it gets the results we want very quickly.
So what type of client would you be dealing with? Because from my perspective, trauma, and I imagine a lot of people are thinking trauma is actually a big thing that someone's experienced. But you've mentioned things like anger, guilt, fear, worry. What type of client would you be dealing with it?
Yeah, well, havening works specifically. Like 80% of my clients come in for anxiety related issues. That's like things like panic attacks, phobias, post-traumatic stress disorder. We get quite a bit of that, actually. And then the negative emotional states where they just feel stuck. They're feeling angry, they're feeling frustrated, or they're worrying a lot. They're having sleep problems, insomnia. And when I talk about trauma, like for me, they're all the symptoms of trauma. They're all the conditions that are produced by trauma. I know a lot, like in Ireland and the UK, we don't necessarily use the word trauma that much, and people often associate it with soldiers fighting wars or some extremely dreadful experience. But day-to-day stuff in life can cause trauma. Getting stuck in an elevator, a relationship breaking up that you don't want to, a negative experience at school when maybe you're embarrassed by your teacher can be a traumatic event for some people. It can affect them in that way. So I suppose it's better in some ways to take the word trauma out of it and talk about the actual conditions that havening actually treats, which I mentioned just there.
And I think that there's a lot of people. I know I'm a naturopath, so in effect, I see that there's always a percentage of people who come to me and the diet is absolutely perfect, or the diet's not the issue, and I know it's not the issue, and I have to help them to get to the point where they realise that controlling their diet further and further isn't the issue, and at that point, I then try and pass them on to another practitioner. I believe there's actually more, let's use the word trauma, actually happening in people's lives that are creating more issues, that actually this could be a really good therapy for them to use to actually resolve that.
Yeah, well, if you think about it, most psychotherapists and counsellors, what they're working with is anxiety related issues. That's why most people come to therapists, because there is a type of anxiety or stress in their life that's causing a problem. Yeah, even with weight loss there you're talking about, and healthy living or diet, I run a program called Think Yourself Thin, and a lot of clients who come to me, it's emotional reasons why they're eating. It's unresolved stress issues, anger, and they're trying to use food to change the way they feel. So they're comfort eating. Yeah. So what I do with them is I use havening to really pinpoint what's causing the emotional eating, and then I haven the memories or the negative emotions that's causing the problem. And once we successfully do that, we often find that the emotional eating stops very quickly, or at least significantly reduces. So The eating is more a symptom as opposed to the main problem. The main problem is often what's behind the eating, which is negative types of emotions or even some sort of trauma.
I agree. Now, what exactly are you doing when you're doing a havening technique to someone?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, someone comes into me, I would sit down, I would explain to them a little bit about the neuroscience behind havening, why it works, how it works. I would, do an intake with them or personal history where I'd talk to them about their past, I'd pinpoint the negative memories, the things that's distressing them. Then when I find them, I may do something called an event havening, where we want to clear a distressful event or memory. So the mechanics of it work like this. So I'd sit in front of the client and I'd ask them to close their eyes and go back to the negative memory. So, remembering what they saw, what they heard, and what they felt. I'd give them about 30 to 40 seconds, and on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being very distressed and 0 being completely relaxed, I would ask them how high to go. Most people who have a distressful memory will go higher than a 6 or 7 within 30 seconds. I then ask them to open up their eyes, clear their mind, and then I proceed with the havening treatment. So I then begin gently stroking their arms from the top of their shoulder down to their elbow, and I'd start distracting them. I'd give them a pleasant visualization like walking along a beach, through a park, where they take 20 steps. And as they imagine that with their eyes closed, I continue using the havening touch, is what we call it, where I'd be gently stroking their arms, their hands, their face. So we're producing the delta waves in the brain. And I may distract them as well by getting them to count. We get them to open up their eyes and move them from right to left, because that creates more delta waves in the brain. And then, they close their eyes again. I keep stroking their arms. And then I would test on a scale of 10 to 0 how far down the scale they've dropped. So we can test very quickly then, what number are you at now? Are you at like maybe a 5, a 4, or 3? And the client will just tell you automatically what number they're at. Generally, in under 10 minutes, with most clients, even in 5 minutes, in a lot of cases, most clients will drop down to a 0, as in it's completely gone. Then I'll stop when I get to a 0, and I'll test it. I'll test what we've done to make sure that's completely gone, that there's not anything else there behind it, and to show the client that the trauma is gone as well. By this time anyway, the clients feel completely relaxed and calm. A lot of them even feel very, very, very sleepy because of the delta waves. Then I ask the client to close their eyes and go back to the distressful memory or the event. And I'd give them about 30 to 40 seconds to go back in and tell me what the difference is. I may even ask them, and I often do this, to try and bring back the distressful feeling or emotion from the event. And, most of the time, nearly every single time, if you have the right memory, you hit upon the major traumatic memory that's causing the problem, they won't be able to get the feelings back. It'll be completely gone. Even if they really do their best to bring it back, they won't be able to. We often find as well the submodalities of the memory change. You often hear in NLP submodalities, the picture changes, the sounds change. So we often find that the memory seems more distant and further away, like a black and white image. The sounds of the memory will seem more faded or switched off, and it's like they can't access the memory anymore.
That's absolutely fascinating. With all the research behind it, is it being encouraged to be taught to teachers in schools?
Well, I know over in the UK, in England, there has been many teachers who've gone through the training, and I believe in 1 or 2 schools they've introduced the havening into the classroom to help relax the students. So I know one of the teachers, she does some self-havening at the beginning of the class with the students. I think these are primary school, and like she gets them to self-haven, so they're doing it on themselves, and they find it quite fun. And as they're stroking the arms, they're producing delta waves, and it's calming the whole classroom down and getting them ready for the class. It's also being used a lot, I think, in school by these teachers for exam anxiety as well, because there's a lot of pressure with exams these days in school. So they're using havening that way. In fact, a lot of clients, even just recently as well, I've had about 4 or 5 clients in the last few months come to me because of exam pressure. They're feeling, very stressed and anxious around the exams, or they're walking into exams. And, a girl recently, she had a major panic attack in the exam. So she came in and we had to clear that. So it works really well for those type of performance anxiety issues as well. Things like public speaking, exam anxiety, social anxiety. It works particularly well for that as well.
It kind of goes against the current biological principles of healing, though, doesn't it? Let's face it. So it's going to be hard for some people to get their head round about the fact that touch and certain points on the body and re-experiencing the trauma is actually undoing all of that.
Yeah, well, when I first seen havening, I heard, going back, it was about three and a half years ago, I heard Paul McKenna in an interview say that he's discovered this new, groundbreaking therapy, and he said it's going to change the face of therapy across the world. And, I wasn't really skeptical myself. I was more curious because I know if McKenna was saying it, because I have a lot of respect for what McKenna does as a therapist. And I thought to myself, this must be something special if Paul's raving about it so much. But, then when I kind of looked into it a little bit more, it was like, it's stroking the arms, it's distraction. And, I'm not a neuroscientist by trade, I'm more of a clinician where I actually do the therapies. And, it can be challenging to understand why it works until you actually understand the neurobiology of touch, what's happening in the brain and the body, and actually understand the neuroscience of what's actually happening in the brain, the limbic system, how it's all connected, what's happening in the amygdala. Once you understand that, it makes much more sense about why it works.
It is interesting about the neurobiology around touch, isn't it? Because that, you've got this in different cultures, the laying on of hands and things like that, and in different religions, where the touch and that particular side of the healing is incredibly important, and we have forgotten that in our Western medical model. We've more or less taken touch out of it. It's almost seen as something you do not do, and unless you're like a massage therapist, or it's almost like you have to gain a permission to even consider any level of touch. It's totally on its head in some respects, but touch is so important.
Yeah, and that's why I really like the havening model, is because of all the research behind it from that neuroscientific perspective, that we can now get up in front of a group of academics, psychotherapists, psychiatrists, neuroscientists, and actually explain from a neuroscientific, neurobiological perspective what is actually happening in the brain and the body when we use touch. So we can actually explain why it works and why it's so effective. And I think that's a big asset to have with a treatment like this, that we can actually explain why it works, and also explain why things like EFT and TFT have worked as well, to a large degree. So
now we talked about teachers learning it. Who can come and learn it with you?
Well, generally it's health professionals, people like psychotherapists, hypnotherapists, counsellors, even if people do specific therapies like CBT. I suppose anyone who's working in the mental health field, especially if they're working with anxiety-related issues. Sometimes coaches come along as well and train in it and use it with their own clients. So anyone who's working in the health professional field are the people who come to do the training.
And how long does it actually take to learn it?
There's a few different steps to doing it. First of all, there's a 2-day training where you learn, once again, the neuroscience behind havening. It's a practical training in the sense where for example, I'd get up, I'd do a live demonstration of a treatment, explain the neuroscience behind it. Then the participants would break up in groups of 3 and all experience a havening each. And there would be facilitated havening practitioners there as well with each group. So that would be the process over the 2 days. Plus that comes with, it's a 7-hour DVD set of a training with Dr. Rudens in New York, which really goes deep into the neuroscience again. And 2 havening manuals, which once again gives you the neuroscience, how to apply all the different techniques, because there's more than one technique, by the way. There's at least half a dozen different havening techniques, and that explains how to use all the different techniques on many different issues. So once the people have done the 2-day training, then before they get certified, they have to go off and do 30 case studies, an online science exam, and also shoot 2 videos of where to do 2 havenings, and then they also have to do a legal and ethics exam. So the bar to become certified, it's set quite high. There's a bit of work that has to be done, but at least by the end of it, when you do get certified, because the doctors, that comes from them, the official certification from New York, at least we can say that people are at a very high standard who are actually certified havening techniques practitioners, have actually done all that work before they get full certification.
Yeah, it's really thorough. Okay, yeah. Stephen, so how do people come and train with you, and how do people find out more about havening?
Yeah, well, my next certified havening training, the Irish one, is in Dublin on the 6th and 7th of May in the Crown Plaza Hotel, Dublin 9. If they go to my website, which is stravershypnosis.com, there's lots of information there about the training, and they can register there if they wish. If they want more general information about havening, they can also go to havening.org. That's the official website for havening worldwide. That's havening.org. There's a lot of great information there also, and videos. So
fantastic.
There's different resources out there people can look at. So there's probably 2 of the main ways people can find out more information about havening.
Superb. Thank you very much, Stephen. I really appreciate you joining me on Food for Thought on Natural Health Radio.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks very much, Debbie. Pleasure talking to you.
And you.